Živijo, lepo pozdravljeni na našem dogodku, Zoom dogodku Identifikacija in zaščita intelektualne lastnine. Zdaj za začetek, da bomo lažje delali, bi vas sam spomnil, da si mikrofone izklopite, dogodek se pa tudi snema, toliko, da ste s tem seznanjeni. Ene par zaslonskih slik bomo tudi naredili, tako da se lahko to pol promovira na naših kanalih. Za začetek bi pa kar povabil profesorja doktorja Gregorja Dolinarja, dekana Fakultete za elektrotehniko, za par uvodnih besed, potem pa še profesorja doktorja Mihaela Sekavčnika, dekana Fakultete za strojništvo, da nas malo spodbudita, pa eno tako zagon data naši tej predstavitvi, našemu dogodku.
Hvala lepa za besedo in prav lep pozdrav vsem udeležencem te delavnice. Zdaj na Fakulteti za elektrotehniko ves čas poudarjamo pomen dobrega sodelovanja naše fakultete z gospodarstvom in na tem področju prav gotovo se lahko pohvalimo z dobrimi rezultati. Seveda je tukaj vedno prostor tudi za izboljšave, ampak ravno pri tem sodelovanju z gospodarstvom smo velikokrat odvisni tudi od različnih zunanjih okoliščin, na katere nimamo vpliva. Zdaj pri samih patentih, zaščiti intelektualne lastnine pa zgodba mogoče malo drugačna. Tukaj jaz menim, da niso še čisto vsi potenciali izkoriščeni, ki jih imamo. Zdaj na fakulteti prav gotovo nekega tehničnega, inženirskega znanja je ogromno. Pri samem tem zapisu, formalizaciji, prenosu teh raziskovalnih dosežkov v patente, izume, pa marsikomu zmanjka časa. In ta zmanjka časa velikokrat pomeni, da mu mogoče zmanjka nekih znanj, izkušenj, pa tudi mogoče kdaj tudi kakšen kanček poguma. Jaz vidim tako delavnico kot eno pomoč in pa tudi eno tako pomembno spodbudo našim zaposlenim, da naredijo še ta dodaten korak. Ker če sem prej omenil, da recimo pri sodelovanju z gospodarstvom je marsikaj odvisno od zunanjih okoliščin, je pa pri tem, koliko nekih patentov bomo imeli, koliko bomo tega našega znanja res tudi potem prenesli, večinoma odvisno samo od nas samih. Torej tukaj lahko največ naredimo sami. Tako da jaz bi se zahvalil pisarni za prenos znanja, za organizacijo tega dogodka in pa seveda zaželel vsem udeležencem veliko uspešnih patentov. Hvala lepa.
Hvala lepa. Prosim še profesor Sekavčnik. Mikrofon.
Se opravičujem. Lep pozdrav tudi z moje strani, z Fakultete za strojništvo. Podobno kot je moj kolega Dolinar ravnokar povedal, tudi Fakulteta za strojništvo ima zelo razvito dejavnost z gospodarstvom in zelo intenzivno se vključujemo tudi v razvojno-raziskovalne projekte, v katerih se rojeva mnogo idej. Ni nujno, da so vedno vse ideje neposredno zdaj ta hip aplikabilne v nekih industrijskih procesih. Lahko obetajo v bistvu zelo dobro uporabo v gospodarstvu, morda kdaj drugič. In tako kot je kolega Dolinar poudaril, mi smo tako osredotočeni na te naše temeljne in aplikativne raziskave in po naravi morda niti nismo tako podjetni, da bi pomislili tudi na zaščito tega znanja, ki ga vlagamo v te aplikacije. No in ravno zaradi tega smo se z veseljem, z velikim veseljem, in tukaj bi se res iskreno zahvalil v imenu Fakultete za strojništvo pisarni, da je dala pobudo, ki smo si z veseljem skupaj s Fakulteto za elektrotehniko odzvali, da dobimo neka nova spoznanja, da morda dobimo tisti kanček poguma, ki nam manjka, ali pa tisto žilico podjetniško vzpodbudimo v sebi, da kakšno svojo idejo tudi patentiramo, ampak ne samo z patentno prijavo, ampak da gremo tudi korak dlje proti morebitni komercializaciji teh idej. Mi smo si namreč tudi v strategiji zadali, da bi te naše ideje komercializirali in to na način, da bi to spodbudilo tako raziskovalce, da bi to spodbudilo celotno raziskovalno akademsko okolje in da bi postalo to v bistvu modus operandi, tako kot to nekatere države, bom rekel, že dolgo let izvajajo in se na nek način ta ideja ali pa te aktivnosti so se vpisale, vgravirale v njihov DNK, tako rekoč raziskovalni DNK, in njim je samo po sebi umevno, da se take inovativne ideje, ki imajo morebitno aplikacijo ta hip ali morda kdaj v prihodnje, inovirajo, patentirajo. Skratka, da se intelektualna lastnina zaščiti. In tudi v mojem imenu jaz želim, da bi se taki dogodki periodično ponavljali, zaradi tega, ker za nami prihajajo nove generacije, ki morebiti rabijo to vrstno spodbudo. In vsem današnjim udeležencem želim veliko novih spoznanj in morda tudi poguma, da bodo svoje lastne ideje pripeljali do uspešnih in komercialno zanimivih patentov. Hvala lepa tudi v mojem imenu.
Hvala lepa za te besede. Mislim, da je zelo pomembno tudi pri takih stvareh, da je podpora vodstva tudi na tej ravni. Zahvaljujem se, da ste si vzeli čas za nekaj besed na začetku. Mislim, da da potrebno težo takim stvarem. Zdaj bi poprosil še našo vodjo pisarne za prenos znanja, Uršo Jerše, da na kratko predstavi našo pisarno.
Hvala, Andrej. Lep pozdrav vsem. Tudi jaz bi se iskreno zahvalila tem lepim besedam in se lahko samo pridružim, v tem smislu, da lahko v pisarni dobite ravno to, kar vam manjka, to se pravi znanje z tega področja, pogum tudi, se tudi rojeva v skupini, in pa seveda tudi neko podporo v vsakodnevnih pravzaprav situacijah, kjer se srečujete z nečim novim, vse, kar je v bistvu vezano na prenos znanja. Zdaj, jaz bom majčkeno sam tako na hitro povedala, kaj pravzaprav delamo, da si boste tudi predstavljali, v kakšnih situacijah pravzaprav se lahko obrnete na nas. Danes bomo večinoma govorili o sami zaščiti, in k temu recimo paše seveda tudi, ko naše inovacije zaščitimo, jih seveda zaščitimo z namenom, da jih bi lahko komercializirali. To se pravi, da dobimo nek monopol nad njimi, in v bistvu iz neke ideje preidejo dejansko v nek, po angleško bi rekli asset, to se pravi v nekaj, kar lahko vrednotimo. Poleg te zaščite in komercializacije pa se pisarna ukvarja oziroma pokriva še dve zelo pomembni področji. Eno je sodelovanje z gospodarstvom na splošno, to se pravi, da poskušamo nekako zbližati dve sferi, in mislim, da je tukaj ena zelo pomembna stvar, ki se v praksi izkaže, predvsem to sklepanje dogovorov. Tudi ko mi že imamo partnerje, potem pa kako se zdaj dogovoriti, in tukaj neko tako specialno pravno znanje zelo prav pride, in zato se že recimo zelo veliko ljudi obrača na nas. In pa tretja stvar, kjer pa smo mogoče še na začetku, pa bi si želeli v prihodnjih letih to zelo, zelo izboljšati, so pa odcepljena podjetja. Danes o tem ne bomo govorili, ampak to bom povedala, da odcepljena podjetja, ker so me vedno sprašujejo, a lahko jaz sploh ustanovim podjetje? Lahko, to se pravi odcepljena podjetja, kjer raziskovalci z namenom, da bodo lahko naprej razvijali in tržili svojo tehnologijo, ustanovijo in so sicer zaposleni na univerzi, pa so hkrati tudi lastniki takih podjetij, so dovoljena, seveda pa je treba določene stvari urediti, in to se uredi preko pisarne za prenos znanja. Zdaj, poleg teh storitev, ki jih nudimo v pisarni, pa so še vedno še druge aktivnosti, ki jih počnemo z namenom neke gradnje inovacijske skupnosti, inovacijskega ekosistema. Tukaj poskušamo predvsem sodelovati z različnimi podpornimi sistemi, kot so recimo Ljubljanski univerzitetni inkubator, ABC akcelerator, tehnološki park in tako naprej. Hkrati pa seveda tudi poskušamo res na neki taki sistemski in partnerski ali pa strateški ravni se povezati z gospodarstvom. Lani smo prvič startali dogodek Uniminds, verjetno ste nekateri od vas tudi bili tam prisotni kot govorci, bodisi kot udeleženci. In tukaj se je pokazalo, da pravzaprav tudi gospodarstvo si zelo želi, kljub temu, da smo že dobri v tem, da imamo veliko sodelovanj, je, kot je tudi dekan povedal, veliko prostora še za nova sodelovanja in za še poglobljenejše odnose. Poleg tega, pa seveda, če se vrnemo na znanje, ki ga lahko tukaj dobite, mi seveda nudimo neko podporo, je pa pomembno, da tudi zaposleni se zavedajo, koliko je to pomembno, da znajo vsaj, da jim približamo malo to in zato mi tudi veliko delavnic organiziramo. Pred leti smo imeli že tudi v živo na fakulteti za strojništvo, zdaj nam pač tega več ne dopušča, tako da smo malo spremenili ta format. Je pa dobro seveda, da imamo lahko potem tudi goste iz tujine in to ni več noben problem. Tako da vabim vas tudi k ogledu našega YouTube kanala, kjer so pravzaprav vse te vsebine, ki se čez leta nabirajo, so potem gor in lahko, ne vem, če vas zanima bolj, ne vem, softverji, si lahko pogledate tam, če vas zanimajo poslovni modeli, tako da so veliko teh delavnic smo potem zbrali in to je tudi eden od razlogov, da današnjo snemamo, zato da se pač te stvari nekako ne izgubljajo. Za konec, pardon, zdaj pa sem nekaj se je zgodilo. Za konec bi vas povabila še na rektorjevo nagrado. In sicer do 19.9. je rok, tako da vem, da zdaj ni več veliko časa, no, če ste kakšni že zasledili ta razpis in mogoče še razmišljate, je to za mene ali ni. Tukaj tudi se ne rabite nič bati, namen rektorjeve nagrade je predvsem to, da greste čez nek proces, da se naučite predstaviti svojo idejo, da se naučite razmišljati malo bolj podjetno, mogoče spoznate tudi kakšne investitorje ali pa pač partnerje iz industrije. Tako da jaz zelo spodbujam vse, da se takih stvari kar pogumno lotijo in tudi, če ne zmagajo, ni nič hudega. Tako včasih moramo prav kakšnega tudi tolažiti. Tako da to je vse namen, ne zato, da se pač nekako počasi učimo teh stvari, ki so za marsikoga nove. Tako, zdaj pa jaz predajam besedo kar Andreju nazaj, da gremo kar na to, za kar smo danes prišli. Hvala, uspešno.
Ja, hvala lepa, Urša. Počasi smo prišli v tisto fazo, zaradi katere smo danes tukaj. Naš osrednji gost je dr. Hajko Pitner, patentni zastopnik. Jaz bi pa želel na začetku samo na kratko en tak uvod narediti v izume, v patente, v postopek prijave in prevzema izuma v okviru Univerze v Ljubljani, seveda. Ja, dobro, bo delalo. Najprej, če okvirimo izum v okvir intelektualne lastnine, je del industrijske lastnine, seveda pa izum se varuje s patentom. Ni pa patent edini način, s katerim lahko neko znanje, nek know-how zaščitimo. To je možno tudi potem prek zaščite know-howa, poslovne skrivnosti, avtorskega dela, modela, znamke in tako naprej. Tukaj bomo potem v nadaljevanju bistveno bolj podrobno šli to pogledati. Izum kot tak, smo rekli, se ščiti s patentom. Pri patentu je potrebno vedeti, da pri patentu gre za nek daj-dam med družbo in izumiteljem. Izumitelj izum razkrije, neko svojo dognanje razkrije družbi kot taki, s tem pa dobi v zameno monopol, da lahko samo on izkorišča ta izum. Zdaj, monopol v ekonomiji seveda ni zaželen, ampak tukaj je pa nek daj-dam med tem, da izumitelj z razkritjem svojega izuma prispeva k celotnemu znanju družbe seveda zato pa dobi v zameno pravico izkoriščanja tega izuma. Druga stvar pomembna je ta, da varovanje izuma s patentom je vedno teritorialno. Se pravi, vedno, ko neko stvar patentiramo, se moramo vedeti, v kateri državi jo bomo patentirali, oziroma se moramo odločiti, v kateri državi jo patentiramo, ker ne velja po celem svetu in ni načina, da bi to veljalo kar vse pač po defaultu povsod, ampak vedno od države do države. Pol v nadaljevanju si bomo pogledali par poti, načinov, kako se patentira, določeni postopki so, ki omogočajo, ki olajšajo tudi patentiranje po več državah po svetu, po Evropi, ampak bomo o tem malo kasneje. Še ena zelo važna stvar je pa časovna omejitev tega monopola, kot smo rekli. Maksimalno je omejeno na 20 let, seveda je pa odvisno od tega, koliko časa se plačuje. In tukaj je dobro biti pri izumih tudi na to stvar pozoren, da pač izum ne bo večno zaščiten, ampak nekaj let. Zdaj v praksi pač to pomeni, da določeni proizvajalci, določene podjetja tudi čakajo, da se izum izteče in potem ga izkoriščajo. Zato je treba pač paziti tudi na ta vidik. Izum ščiten s patentom. Tukaj obstajajo pa določene omejitve te zaščite. Tukaj bomo spet v nadaljevanju, doktor Hajko bo bistveno bolj podrobno predstavil te stvari, ampak na kratko, ni vse patentabilno, neka odkritja znanstvene teorije se ne da patentirati. Druga stvar pomembna je tudi, da po različnih državah so različna pravila, kaj se lahko patentira in kaj ne. Amerika recimo ima malo drugačen koncept patentiranja in mislim, da omogoča malo širši nabor stvari, ki jih lahko patentiramo, med drugim recimo tudi nek poslovni model, kar pri nas v Evropi ni možno. Za patent pa mora biti tudi izpolnjeni določeni pogoji. Samo na kratko, zdaj v tej fazi, potem bomo šli to bistveno bolj natančno čez. Mora biti nov, se pravi, da ni dostopen javnosti. Mora biti neočitna rešitev za strokovnjaka, inventiven in pa ne nazadnje tudi uporaben, ker izumi, patenti, nek končni namen patentiranja, varstva, to, da se dobi monopol nad izkoriščanjem, je vseeno končni namen ta, da se ga uporabi. Univerza v Ljubljani ima nek poseben postopek, kako se izum prijavi, patentira. Tukaj igra glavno vlogo naša pisarna. Tukaj spodaj je naveden pravilnik, ki ga zdaj ne bi posebno razlagal, ampak gre za to, da izumitelj, ki ima neko invencijo, nek izum, obvesti našo pisarno o izumu in potem mi peljemo cel postopek. Od tega, da članica, matična fakulteta poda neko stališče o tem izumu, predlog za sprejetje izuma univerze na univerzo gre na komisijo za inovacije, rektor sprejme sklep o prevzemu izuma. In s tem postane izum last Univerze v Ljubljani. Ni nujno, da je Univerza v Ljubljani edini lastnik izuma. Imamo tudi pri nas v naši pisarni trenutno ogromno patentov, ogromno izumov, kjer je skrbništvo, kjer je lastništvo deljeno ali med zunanjimi podjetji, z drugimi fakultetami, drugimi univerzami. To je vse odvisno, v kakšnem sodelovanju je izum nastal. Važno pa je, da nek izumitelj, ki je do tega izuma prišel v okviru svoje zaposlitve na fakulteti, na Univerzi v Ljubljani, je pač dolžen ta izum prijaviti in lastništvo izuma je potem fakultete, univerze. Hkrati z tem pravno-formalnim postopkom prevzema izuma pa že lahko v naši pisarni tudi usklajujemo aktivnosti, recimo pogodbo o skupnem izumu, tukaj je že Urša nekaj povedala o tem, poskrbimo za pogodbo, recimo če je lastništvo izuma deljeno z nekim podjetjem, z neko drugo univerzo, s komerkoli drugim, hkrati pa usklajujemo že lahko patentno prijavo s patentnim zastopnikom. Ta postopek gre lahko potem, ko je že sprejet sklep o prevzemu, ali pa malenkost prej, če ni toliko malo primerov, recimo, ko se s patentnimi prijavami mudi, ali zaradi nekih diplomskih nalog, ali zaradi doktorskih nalog, strokovnih člankov in tako naprej. Izjemno važna stvar, in to je tisto, kar bi danes tudi rad zelo poudaril, dekana sta že malo tudi nakazala v to smer, v tem raziskovalnem duhu in fokusom na raziskovanje se včasih pozabi, da patent je veljaven in je zaščiten samo, če pred to vložitvijo patentne prijave ne pride do razkritja. Tako kot sem rekel, ali v obliku doktorske disertacije, magistrskega dela, članka. Zelo važno je, da se najprej patentira, najprej vloži patentno prijavo in šele potem objavi. To je lahko razlika en dan. Ni tukaj, smo imeli take primere, ko je bil datum že določen in smo potem hiteli s samo prijavo. Lahko je en dan prej, važno je, da je, ker sicer v nadaljnjem postopku patentiranja lahko ta patentna prijava pade in patent ni priznan. Urša je že kar dobro povedala našo vlogo v tej pisarni, našo vlogo pri patentiranju same pisarne. Mogoče samo na kratko, pri patentih vedno nastajajo neki stroški. Eno so uradne pristojbine, takse, drugo so potem stroški patentnih zastopnikov. V okviru evropskega projekta, ki trenutno še teče, smo del teh stroškov tudi v pisarni lahko krili, počasi se ta shema izteka, ampak toliko za informacijo, da tukaj neki stroški nastajajo. Ta glavni stroški pa nastajajo potem pri vložitvi patentov za posamezne države in nadaljevanju teh patentnih prijav čez leta. Potem v tem glavnem delu naše predstavitve bomo šli čez te prijave. Način, kako patent prijaviti, jih je več. Lahko se to prijavi v nacionalni državi, recimo slovenski patent, lahko v neki drugi državi. Ne moramo se spet izogniti PCT pogojem, ne, malo za šalo, ampak kratica je pač ista. Gre za mednarodno patentno prijavo, imenovano tudi PCT, kjer zaobjamemo z eno prijavo dejansko ogromno držav, ki so podpisnice tega Patent Cooperation Treaty-ja, ali pa potem evropska prijava. Tukaj bo doktor Hajko v nadaljevanju še precej povedal okrog tega. Mogoče en tak naša praksa, kako prijave delamo, če se želi patentirati na mednarodnem nivoju, se pravi za več držav. Imamo prakso v naši pisarni, da vložimo prijavo patenta v Luksemburgu. Kot vidite, so za sorazmerno nizke stroške, dobimo pa že koristi PCT prijave ali pa EPA prijave, to je predvsem tako imenovan search report, ki da mnenje o patentabilnosti. Gre za preizkus patenta, ali bo neko mnenje o tem, ali bo podeljen ali ne. Gre pa za te tri pogoje za patent, ki smo jih prej omenili. Sam postopek je sorazmerno dolg, mogoče za nekoga, ki se s tem toliko ne ukvarja, je to precej dolgo in za današnji čas, ko se stvari kar hitro dogajajo. Recimo tukaj je primer PCT prijave. Najprej se vloži nacionalno prijavo v Sloveniji, Nemčiji, recimo pri nas imamo prakso precej tudi v Luksemburgu. Po 12 mesecih vložimo PCT prijavo in še nekje po 30 mesecih od prve vloge pridejo nacionalne faze, kjer se izbere določene države, kjer je dejansko potem patent veljaven. Zdaj, tak sam postopek je nekoliko dolg, ampak recimo ena od prednosti te dolžine samega postopka je tudi ta, pri patentih, kot sem že povedal, je en ključen del uporabnost. Da to pride v uporabo, da se to pride v komercializacijo, v dejansko uporabo. In ta rok 30 mesecev recimo je idealen, da od vložitve je potem 30 mesecev časa za nenazadnje patent spraviti v življenje. Ali v prodajo, ali v nek izdelek, ali v glavnem v življenje. Če gre za prodajo, potem tudi ni treba plačevati potem teh nacionalnih držav, oziroma se ve, v katerih državah bi to potem bilo patentirano. Zdaj, če ima kdo kakšna vprašanja, lahko tudi zdaj v tej fazi, drugače bo potem možnost še na koncu predstavitve tudi za kakšna obsežnejša vprašanja. Za vprašanje predlagam, da jih kar napišete v chat. Sodelavka Teja bo to spremljala, pa bomo lahko odgovorili tudi na to. Zdaj vidim, da dr. Heiko Pittner je že pripravljen, tako da Heiko, welcome. I suggest the stage is yours and you can start your presentation. Microphone.
Thank you very much. So far I didn't understand much. I hope that my presentation will just fit in what you have said and just it kind of adds something of value. I will just share my screen and my presentation. Yeah, so now you should be able to see my screen. And yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about specifics of IP protection. And before I just start, I just would like to introduce myself. I'm Heiko Pittner. I'm a European patent attorney at SACO. SACO is a kind of a pan-European law firm. We have several offices, most of them in Scandinavia, but we have also offices in the UK and in Germany. I am actually located in Germany. I'm working out of the Munich office. I'm a German national, and I have actually a physics background. I have a PhD in physics, and after that, after I've finished my PhD in physics, I entered the world of patents, and I'm now working for kind of 16 years as a patent attorney. And when I will later on talk a little bit about novelty and inventive step. And there I would also kind of, when I'm there, I will also maybe start from where I've been when I have a PhD student and how I have looked at novelty and inventive step then and how I look at it now. But that's something for later. So now I just try to go. So here's a brief overview of the content of my presentation. I will just about talk a little bit about what is an invention and who is an inventor. and then about aspects that are related to the patent application and formal and substantive requirements for obtaining a patent. What is an invention? An invention is kind of a creative achievement that enables a concrete and technical solution to a given technical problem. And an invention may be made in any field of technology, and the requirement is that it is new, that it involves an inventive step, and that it is of industrial use, or that it is susceptible of industrial application. Usually, when one thinks about patents and patent applications, the main hurdles are that the invention is new and involves an inventive step. It is usually kind of very normal that there's in industrial application. It's usable in industry. It can be commercialized in that way. I had actually in my career once one invention where it was at stake whether it is industrially usable or not. And this was an invention which was made like in the field of quantum mechanics. It had to do something with like spin orientation of quantum systems. And there was a question if this invention is still kind of usable in an application, in a technical application, or if this is kind of pure science. But at the end, the examiner also decided that this is kind of fulfilling this requirement of industrial usability of industrial application. There are also like creative achievements that are excluded from being patentable and not regarded as inventions are creative achievements which are either of abstract or non-technical nature, such as discoveries, scientific theories, and mathematical methods, aesthetic creations and presentations of informations, schemes, rules, and methods for performing mental acts, playing games, or doing business, and programs for computers. But these exclusions or these achievements are only excluded from being patentable as such. So it means like programs for computers are as such are excluded. Aesthetic creations as such are excluded. But for example, if we talk here about aesthetic creations, if there are technical aspects that are present in such aesthetic creations, it is not anymore an aesthetic creation as such, and it is not excluded from patentability. So this is a criteria that can be kind of overcome if this aspect of technicity, if we can show that there's kind of a technical aspect in an aesthetic creation, then this exclusion principle is not valid anymore. The same applies, for example, for mathematical methods. For example, this exclusion applies if a claim is directed to a purely, and here it is very important that we think about purely abstract mathematical method, and the claim does not require any technical means. Then, for instance, a method for performing a fast Fourier transform on abstract data, which does not specify the use of any technical means, is a mathematical method as such. But if there can be made a relation to a technical means, to a technical application, then this exclusion principle could be overcome. And as said, also programs for computers as such are excluded from patentability. But of course, and that's my next slide, computer implemented inventions can be patented. So this slide here kind of deals with kind of what are patentable inventions in the technical field. And of course, like normal inventions, as we know them, like in the field of mechanical and electrical engineering, physics, chemistry, and so on, can be patented. And also, as I said before, computer implemented inventions can be patented. Such inventions cover claims which involve computers, computer networks, or other programmable apparatuses, whereby at least one feature is realized by means of a program. The question here that one may ask if one thinks about if a computer implemented invention is patentable is there a technical effect achieved by the process which the computer program is intended to carry out when it is run? Thus, and in particular, if one talks about patenting inventions at the European Patent Office, one has, in the context of computer implemented inventions, think about technical effect. Is there a technical effect that is provided by a computer program? If this is the case, there's a high chance that also computer implemented inventions can be patented. It's even the case that computer implemented inventions that make use of artificial intelligence, AI technologies, can be patented. This is actually at the moment a very active field in the legal literature, and there's also kind of case law that is being established by the European Patent Office. What requirements have to be fulfilled that computer implemented inventions in that technical field of artificial intelligence can be patented. This is very ongoing, it's a very modern field. And the European Patent Office actually give some examples where artificial intelligence plays a role in this term 4RI, so first generation and these examples are kind of healthcare informatics and bioinformatics, like clinical sample screening and decision making are as good as or even better than by a human operator. Artificial intelligence will play a growing role in identifying protein structures, targeting drug interactions, and analyzing DNA and RNA sequences. Also in the field of automotive, self-driving vehicle technology will require real-time processing of a massive amount of vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-everything data. In industry, automated predictive maintenance, data analysis, process design, and defect detection will help factories to run efficiently and to consistently produce high-quality products. So far, we have more or less talked about what can be patented, what can be patentable. It's like, if we talk about technology, if there's a technical effect, as a rule of thumb, I would say this can be patented. Now we come to the question, who is an inventor? And generally speaking, an inventor is a natural person who has made an independent intellectual contribution directed at the invention. And this can be anyone who conceived the initial idea which defines the research led to the invention, actually devised the experiments or products which form the basis of the invention, carried out any experiments or other processes which required that person to show initiative to conceive and/or complete the invention, interpreted the data and recognized the significance of results. This does usually not include persons that simply carried out work under instruction, regardless of how much skill and effort this took, had no part in the research, regardless of whether or not they funded it, were associated with it, owned the facilities which were used in the research, contributed very general work or assistance, was a project manager or supervisor, but did not contribute technically to the actual invention. And inventorship and authorship are not the same. Co-authors may not necessarily be co-inventors. So if we now talk about the process of kind of getting a patent, it starts with an idea you would have, and then we would have to write a patent application that kind of summarizes your idea and that more or less describes your idea in detail. And this patent application would have to be filed at a patent office, the European Patent Office, or as has been pointed out before, at the Luxembourg Patent Office. And if we think about the European Patent Office as kind of the main patenting instance in Europe, it would go through an examination process there. And at the end of this examination process, if things go well, we obtain a patent. And it all starts at the patent office with filing a patent application. And such a patent application contains, as mentioned here on the slide, a request for grant, kind of a grant request. And it contains information about the applicant and the inventors. The patent application contains a description. This is usually the text of the patent application. It specifies the technical field to which the invention relates. It indicates the background art useful to understand the invention. It discloses the invention, provides sufficient technical information to enable a skilled person to put the invention as claimed into practice. And the description describes in detail at least one way of carrying out the invention claimed, using examples where appropriate. The most important part of the patent application are the claims. The claims define the subject matter for which protection is sought, and they determine the scope of protection. The patent application also usually has some figures, and in this description, references can be made to the figures. The figures are very typically, and it's actually a kind of a requirement that they are black and white drawings. And the patent application also contains an abstract which provides brief technical information about the invention. And the abstract in a patent application is something which is very different from an abstract in a scientific paper. The abstract in a patent application is usually not very important. It's therefore usually only a copy of claim 1, because claim 1, the claims define the subject matter for which protection is sought. So claim 1 usually provides the broadest scope, the broadest description about the invention, and that's why one usually also copies only claim 1 into the abstract, and it's a sufficient requirement for the European Patent Office. Then if we talk a little bit about claims, there are in principle two types of claim categories. One claim category is a product apparatus claim. the other category is a method claim. Product claims are claims that are related to the physical entity, such as an object, an article, an apparatus, machine, system, cooperating apparatus, that are related to your invention. If we think about a product claim, it is, as a rule of thumb, a very good idea to think about the product or the system or the object that you have in mind, you have invented, and that might be commercialized. And then to think about what are the essential features of this product. And typically these very essential features should be put into the product claim. Examples for product claims are, for example, a steering mechanism incorporating an automatic feedback circuit, or kind of a woven garment comprising, and then one would kind of put in the features that would characterize this woven garment. Or like a communication system comprising a plurality of transmitting and receiving stations. And then one would kind of to come up with a claim, put in the characteristic features that would describe this communication system. Then a product or an apparatus claim can also be related to substances, like in the field of life sciences, or like in the field of chemistry, could relate to an active chemical compound, to proteins, or to DNA. Or a product claim can also be related to a composition comprising 2 or more chemical compounds and include formulations. Method claims are process claims that describe a technical process that is carried out. A method claim could be related to a method of producing a compound, like producing a protein. A method claim can also be related to a method for diagnosing a disease or a method of treatment, which are typically only accepted in a few countries, like in the United States or in Australia. There are also kind of special type of method claims, and these are use claims. And one differentiates here between non-medical use claims and medical use claims. And use claims in a non-medical sense can, for example, be the use of a product to carry out a process or to do something with a product, or use of a known substance X to achieve a new effect Y. These are mainly claims that are related to the field of chemistry or biology. There are also medical use claims. It's like a use of a known substance X in the manufacture of a medicament for the new treatment of a disease Y. Then formal and substantive requirements to obtain a patent. In order to be granted, the claimed invention needs to be novel, inventive, sufficiently disclosed, and supported by the description. So what does this mean? So as I said, when I was a kind of a PhD student and I started in the field of patents, I very often thought, okay, but this is kind of relatively easy. It's relatively trivial. That cannot be patentable. And at the end, it is. And it is a little bit that as a scientist, as a PhD student, or even as a professor, one thinks differently than as kind of a patent attorney, or like, in other words, the scientific world has different thinking about these terms, novelty, inventiveness, as the patent world. And I hope here I can maybe I'm here a little bit vague, but I can maybe just help you kind of to understand a little bit the terms novelty and inventive step. And in particular, I mean, what I have learned from the interaction with some of you in the audience is that when you have an idea about what could be patented, we just talk at the very beginning, you present your idea, then I usually kind of help you to discuss the prior art, what you have found. And so maybe what I'm now talking about novelty and inventive step helps a little bit in kind of understanding, assessing your invention with respect to the prior art. If we talk about novelty, it's like also in the patent law, an invention shall be considered to be new if it does not form part of the state of the art. And the state of the art shall be held to comprise everything made available to the public by means of a written or oral description, by use, or in any other way before the date of filing of the application. And there's also kind of, in some countries, a so-called novelty grace period, like in the United States, in Korea, in Japan, or in Australia. Disclosures by the inventors within defined periods, like 12 months in the United States, prior to filing are not taken into account as prior art when assessing novelty or inventive step. So this means that in the United States, an inventor could disclose his or her invention and then file within 12 months a patent application. And this first disclosure, I mean, would not be relevant with regard to the novelty in the United States. However, we have to keep in mind that no grace period for EP applications exist. And there, as a rule of thumb, and please keep that in mind, file before you publish. And if we now think a little bit more about how do we actually assess novelty, as I said before, from interaction with some of you, you have a good idea about your invention, you have a good idea about the prior art that is out there. If you think about novelty, as a rule of thumb, compare your solution, think about what are the core features of your solution, and compare it only with one piece of prior art at a time. So don't take two pieces of prior art, for example, two documents that you have found as one document and just combine the two documents and compare it with your prior art. Just take one document and compare it with your prior art. It's the same if you compare your idea, if it's a product, compare this product with only one product that is on the market and think about if you are novel over this product. Then the next criterion is the criterion of inventive step. An invention is considered as involving an inventive step if, having regard to the state of the art, it is not obvious to a person skilled in the art. The term obvious means that something which does not involve the exercise of any skill or ability beyond that to be expected of the person skilled in the art. Obviousness is not only at hand when the results are clearly predictable, but also when there is a reasonable expectation of success. So this is kind of a lot of words, a lot of phrases, but what do they actually mean, or how could you actually assess at least at a first step, at a first level, whether your invention is obvious or not obvious. As a rule of thumb, if you think about your invention and you have looked at the prior art, you may get an idea about what is actually the so-called closest prior art with regard to your invention. For example, what is the document, the prior art document you have identified? What is the closest one to your invention? And then you just use this prior art and you think about what are the technical differences between your invention and the closest prior art. And you can identify these technical differences, these technical features. And then you would think about, okay, what other document would be kind of close, could disclose these technical features. And if there's such a document, you may think about, is it actually rendered obvious when I start from the first document and I just consider the second document? Is it actually obvious that I arrive at my invention taking these two documents in combination? And this is a good way to assess whether there is an inventive step or not. And I have to say, when you do this assessment, you have kind of found some prior art, you do it, we discuss about it, we file a patent application. The same process, in essence, is also done by the examiner. It is only that the examiner usually finds more relevant prior art, and we just have to deal with this prior art found by the examiner during the examination phase. But in essence, the same steps are done by the examiner, and when we just look at the prior art by the examiner, also by us. A further requirement is a requirement of sufficiency of disclosure. I have to say this requirement is a very critical requirement in the field of chemistry and life sciences. Usually in the field of like medical, mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, or also in the field of computer implemented inventions, this criterion of a sufficiency of disclosure is fulfilled easily if one describes one mode of implementing the invention. And if we talk here a little bit about general principles, the subject matter, the claimed invention must be sufficiently disclosed to allow the skilled person to perform the invention. And this means also with regard to inventions in the field of chemistry and life sciences to achieve the claimed technical effect over the whole area claimed without undue burden and without needing inventive skill. And the description must disclose any feature essential for carrying out the invention in sufficient detail. And we should also at least describe one way of enabling the person skilled in the art to carry out the invention. So I'm actually through my presentation. I would just like to summarize at the very end. What is very important, if you plan to patent an idea, file before you publish. So first get your application, the patent application, filed at a patent office, and then publish. And it has to be, say, one could publish or one could file at the same day of publication. So, but it would be, I mean, we cannot file, or we shouldn't file one day after the publication. So the deadline would be the day of the publication. And as I said before, I think for you, if you want to assess your idea, if it can be patented or not, and if you look at the prior art at your own, if you do some search for prior art, keep in mind that you compare your invention with one prior art piece of art at a time to check for novelty. And if you check for an inventive step, ask yourself the question, when you combine the teaching of two prior art documents, would you arrive in an obvious manner at your invention? So that's it at a core, in a nutshell. I hope you have some questions or some comments.
Thank you very much, Heiko. It was a very good presentation, very detailed. Now we have some time for some questions from the audience. We have one question from Leon. If Leon, if you're able, you can ask live to make a little bit interactive, or maybe I can read your question. Okay, Leon don't have microphone. As an innovator myself, how much actual protection does a patent offer today? Unfortunately, I have read and heard of patents being stolen and modified up to 15% and then sold. The innovator losing in court because the court stated that it cannot prove that the invention patent was stolen from him since it was changed about 15%. So in actual life, how much actual legal protection does the patent offer to a small-scale inventor with a possibly big-scale product? I think it's a very, very good question. Maybe.
Yeah, that's actually also a very difficult question. So we have to say, if we think about the patent claim 1 or the independent claims, they in essence define the scope of protection of the patent. They should be broad, just I mean, they should overcome the prior art, like be novel and inventive, but they should still be broad to cover a broad subject matter. And that's the scope of protection. I mean, if someone else is reading your patent application and modifies it in the sense that this other person adds something and kind of comes up with another patent application and gets a patent granted, then I think you cannot do much about it, because that's kind of it's kind of the trade-off. I mean, the patent application is published 18 months after the priority or filing date, and everybody else can read it, and of course is able to modify it. So it's kind of difficult to go into court and, I mean, to claim that this invention was stolen. I think the proper way is to have a patent application that is drafted, and that the claim 1 is covering a kind of a scope of protection that it has some value. And I think if this is possible, it should also be possible. And if the idea behind has some commercial value, I think it's also possible to commercialize the idea independent of the other patent application. In particular, the other patent application or the other patent will be younger than your patent, so it does not have an effect on your patent. So I hope that somehow answers your question. Okay,
but if someone stole your patent, the only way is the court, right?
I mean, if someone has stolen the patent, then there are actually also kind of legal clauses where you could go to court and with this demand and say, okay, it has been stolen. I want this invention transferred to me on my name. But I see the point where as it was also outlined in the question, that it was modified, that the idea was modified somehow by 15% or so, and then another application was filed. So I think, and as I said, if the patent application is kind of filed, it gets published after some 18 months after the priority date or the filing date, and then everybody can read it. And of course, everybody can come up with another idea that builds on your patent application. And this other person can, of course, also file a patent application. It does not mean that it's stolen. It's just that, I mean, it can be improved, an improved idea, so to speak.
But maybe, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but maybe it's also important to say here that sometimes in this kind of case, you will still need, if this other person wants to use his patent, he will need a license from our
Yes.
patent, right?
Yes.
So this is maybe also important to say. Right?
Yes. I mean, it depends all on the case, but if of course, if this other person wants to commercialize a product that is covered by your claim, you have the older right. This other person needs a license. Yes, that's also the case. Yes, but I mean, let it put the other way around. It's the idea behind the patent, from a historical reason, is that a person who has made an invention should make this invention public. That's why patent applications are published, should become public, so that everybody else can see what has been invented and can maybe come up with other inventions. Like, this is kind of where we say kind of patents also drive innovation. And what an inventor gets back for publishing the idea is this monopoly for 20 years. So this is how historically patents have been introduced. Like, give your idea to the society and you get a monopoly right. That's
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question from Luca. Maybe Luca, if you would like to ask live, you are free. Unless I would read. Do examiners have an objective methodology of determining what is obvious in the process of finding an inventive step? For example, after reading the patent, everything might seem subjectively obvious when comparing it to a prior art. To what extent is something considered obvious? For example, if some element of patent in technical discipline A is similar in some aspect, and some element from a patent in discipline B is also similar in another aspect, will your patent in discipline C be obvious?
so actually a good question. So the examiner does the same assessment as I tried to explain. The examiner looks at first at the claim and does a search for prior art that is relevant for the claim. And then the examiner looks at the prior art which is the most relevant one. This is typically document D1. And the examiner then looks at what features are not disclosed in D1. It basically looks at claim 1. Claim 1 is the independent claim. There might be other independent claims, but just talk about claim 1. What is not in document D1? This would be the distinguishing features. And then the examiner looks at a second document that he can possibly find. And then the question is, are these documents are these features that are not in D1, are they all in D2? And if the answer is yes, the question is, do we have an inventive step? So meaning that the examiner would have to look at again at these distinguishing features and think about what technical problem is solved by these features. And then he would come up with a technical problem, and then he would think about, if you have this technical problem, does the second document talk about this technical problem, and do these features as disclosed in the technical in document D2 solve the technical problem? And if this is the case, then he would possibly say, yeah, there is no inventiveness. So in short, the examiner also in inventive step discussion uses two documents and tries to argue that there is no inventive step in view of these two documents. That's so yes, there's a method that is done by the examiner, and it's a so-called problem solution approach at the European Patent Office. And what the examiner usually does not do, or he cannot do, and that would something which we as attorneys could also bring up as an argument, he usually cannot combine a document from technical field A with another document from technical field B, because he usually has to use, or he should use, two documents from the same technical field to which the claim that is under discussion is related. So we have to stay in the same technical field. I hope this answers the question or somehow. And I have to say, this discussion about inventive step is really a very difficult discussion. It's not a very easy discussion. There are a lot of kind of aspects that play a role here. It's the discussion that is in the core of in the core of the examination procedure of a patent. Is there an inventive step or not? This is a very difficult question usually. And at the end, when we talk about inventive step, and you have an idea and you think about prior art, at the very end, inventive step can only be discussed once we know the prior art that is cited by the examiner and documents, how they can be, if there are documents that can be combined and how they would kind of be combined. Then it really makes sense to think about inventive step.
Thank you very much. And about this question also, at the end, when the patent is filed in some country, there is also dependent on the examiner of country's patent office, right?
Yes, I mean it's dependent on the examiner. It should be. So if you think about the European Patent Office, they have really a problem solution approach where it should at least to be to some extent not so much depend on the examiner. Still, there is some examiners are more critical than the others, but it should not depend on the examiner. But of course, when we have like the German Patent Office, for example, they also try to use this problem solution approach because it's a very say straightforward approach to assess inventive step. But for example, the examiners at the German Patent Office, they usually argue that the skilled person has more knowledge than the skilled person at the European Patent Office. So the skilled person at the European Patent Office is usually a person that is not a professor, that is not a PhD student. It's from the knowledge that is put into that person is far below that. And the German Patent Office would just say, okay, the skilled person is kind of a well-trained engineer in that field that has a long-term experience. The skilled person knows that. That's not the case at the European Patent Office. So here's the difference. And I have to say there's also a difference if we look about the situation in the United States. The examiners at the US Patent Office, they don't use this problem solution approach. Examiners at the US PTO, they basically can just combine two documents or three documents And what they would do is, if they assess inventive step, they would just look at if the features we have in claim 1 would just be disclosed in 2 documents or in 3 documents, and then they would say, okay, they are disclosed in 2 documents, and therefore it's obvious. And they would say, okay, we didn't overcome this requirement. So that's the difference.
Okay.
Just close my window. I have some rain, which may.
Okay. If someone from the audience would like to ask something, you are free to open your mic and ask a question. There is also, regarding to the technical innovations and apparatuses in the field of technical innovations, last few years, there is also some software involved in apparatus. And when we try to patent an apparatus, how is the software also protected or not? How is with that case?
So when, I mean, it's highly it depends on the claim formulation. But I mean, like, we would have to think about kind of the apparatus which we kind of claim. For example, if we just use think about automotive, for example, whatever brake system or so we can certainly claim kind of a brake system having some means that carry out some software. And in that sense, the software would also be protected, at least indirectly. What we usually try to do if we think about software systems, we usually would try to claim software by use of a method claim, so to speak. Like a software is usually a program that does something, and that's why we can claim software by method claims. And there are kind of also kind of formulations for kind of software claims that are also can also be found at the European Patent Office website. But they refer back to method claim. That's why one typically discloses or kind of tries to claim software via method claims. And if one thinks about kind of more like software, where we see, for example, a lot of software claims at the moment is in graphical user interfaces. I mean, many devices are like, I mean, my smartphones are very good example here. The intelligence of the smartphone is more or less in the graphical user interface. So there one would also try to claim the functionality of a graphical user interface via software. The functionality of a graphical user interface via method claim. And here we come into this, or we may run into the problem if we think about software and also graphical user interfaces, that a pure representation of information cannot be patented. So we have to be aware that if you just display some information, we may run into a problem, and we would have to claim also graphical user interface in the sense that there can be argued that there's some technical effect. As soon as there's a technical effect, it's relatively easy to also claim software. And I mean, in many other fields, like in mechanical engineering, like if you think about robots or all kind of machines, there are more and more kind of software related. So one would typically claim the apparatus that is kind of configured to do something. And also, in particular, if there's kind of a lot of software involved, we'll also try to claim a method claim that is related to the apparatus and to the software that controls the apparatus. So I guess in general, or when software is involved, one should just go for an apparatus claim and a method claim.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Maybe some question. Dobro, če ni nekih posebnih vprašanj, potem bi počasi zaključili z današnjo delavnico. Vedno ste dobrodošli v naši pisarni, ali na posvetu, ali za prijavo iz Zooma. Ta postopek po prijavi iz Zooma je vedno tak, da se dostikrat, če ste v dvomih, tudi posvetujemo z patentno pisarno, organiziramo en sestanek z ZAKO patentno pisarno in tako da smo vam na voljo. So, Heiko, also to you, thank you very much for your contribution to this webinar today.
Thank you as well.
I hope that it is informative and useful to your inventions.
Yeah, thank you very much also for kind of attending the meeting, and yeah, also thank you for the invite. It was a pleasure for me. And yeah, I have to say, as a patent attorney, we don't give so much presentations, and so it's also kind of somehow I would put it as a new experience for me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.